Hello, I'm Deb Vanderbilt from Fisher's English Department. Thanks so much for joining us today to hear about Fisher Reads, which is an innovative program where students across many departments study a classic text at the same time, and then they share their insights and the research they've done about it together in various events. Fisher Reads will take place this year on the last day of September and then throughout the month of October. And joining me to talk about it today are Dr. Linda McCammon from the Department of Religious Studies.
Hi, Deb.
Hi. Dr. Tim Madigan from the Philosophy Department. And Dr. Claire Smith from the Economics Department.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. So my first question today, Linda, I know you were one of the starters of Fisher Reads, so tell me, it's the 5th year, I think, this year. So what is the objective and what are you hoping students will get out of it?
Well, it just, Fisher Reads here really started kind of spontaneously with faculty. I was looking at some common reading programs across the country, and we noticed that most of these programs were reading a single book for an entire freshman class and sometimes sophomore. And we kind of thought that was going to be too ambitious, so we wanted to start small. So we were sitting, Tim was reminding me, we were sitting in the cyber
Cafe.
and just sort of throwing around ideas. And he suggested, it's all his fault, suggested that we use Billy Budd as the first text. And I was going to be using it in my ethics class. And Tim, you were using it
In ethics
in
also.
another ethics. And it just worked. It worked. And the students in both of our classes read the book. And of course, we helped them. But and then it just started from there. And as time went on, we discovered other texts, really great texts that we wanted to use. So, for example, we read The Lottery, and that's when we brought our friend Claire into the mix from economics, and we also did The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. And we had specific reasons why we wanted to do these common readings. We wanted to really expose students to some really great classic influential texts, and texts that we knew would really challenge some of their ideas, their worldview, their values. We also really wanted to have a chance of interdisciplinary inquiry, which we don't get enough of. As much as we try here at Fisher. We also really wanted to get students to read tough texts, not easy books, because we really did want to help them improve their reading, writing, and critical thinking skills. And we also wanted them to understand the relevance of these classic texts for the day and how they can actually address some of our current issues and problems. And finally, I think we've all benefited from the sense of community that comes when students and faculty all engage the same text. So that, in a nutshell, are some of the reasons why we sort of, and it's been evolving and it continues to evolve.
That's great. So I see the book on the table.
There it is.
Why was Utopia chosen this year?
Well, actually, I owe it to Father Al Silwicki, who just happened to mention to me last semester that it was the 500th anniversary of the publication of Utopia. I've been using Thomas More's Utopia in my introduction to philosophy classes for many years, because when I first started at St. John Fisher, I asked my students, do any of you know who John Fisher was? And sadly, very few of them did. So I thought, well, at least you're going to take one class where you'll learn who he was through his friend Thomas More. And I introduced More's work in the sort of the history of philosophy, and also the idea of Thomas More as kind of a moral exemplar, someone like Socrates or Martin Luther King, who was willing to die for what he believed in. So at any rate, when I learned about the anniversary, without any excuse for a party, this would be a good text for us to use for Fisher Reads.
Yeah. Great suggestion.
And I just want to ask Claire, so I attended the events for the lottery, and I heard things that I had thought of before through my own reading from the presentation that day, except for your students. I had never thought about the economic component. And so your presence, I think, on this panel and in the program is really awesome, because we don't think literature and economics most of the time. So what's your interest in Utopia?
So it's been really fun. I came to the Fisher Reads program a tad later, right, with Adam Smith, and then the lottery, and now Utopia. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed, working with Dr. Madigan and Linda
So, Dr. McCammon. I totally
No,
blanked
no,
out
that's
on
okay.
the last name.
Keep that in.
So I've really enjoyed working with my colleagues on this. Utopia was a good fit because this year I'm teaching labor economics, and I firmly believe that economics is everywhere. Economics is mischaracterized, I think, as a field that applies only to GDP and stock prices and things in the business section, when in fact it's a worldview or a way of looking at the world that you can use in any sphere of life. I mean, I think a great definition of economics is the study of people engaged in the ordinary business of life. So because of that, in some of the teaching econ workshops that I've gone to, we actually talk about using literature, and I use a lot of music in my classes, and we try to use other ways to bring home the economic concepts and show where and how they're relevant. So Utopia is a great choice, one specifically for labor, because there is some talk in there about how jobs are allocated, how the products, the fruits of those labor are allocated, and part of how the society is organized. I think all of us, I mean most of us, want to see a better society, right? We want to see society organized in a way that is just and fair and productive and fruitful and enjoyable. But exactly how to do that, how to actualize those desires, is something that's been debated for centuries, right? And I think this, what's it say in Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun. I think this text is a great example of that, because the very same issues on how to decide who makes what and who gets what, and the rule of law in a society is it's discussed in this work from 500 years ago. It's discussed on the news and in bars and coffee shops and tables, kitchen tables today.
Especially in an election year.
Absolutely,
Great
it's
year.
especially
Yeah.
timely,
Right.
I
We'll definitely be
suppose.
getting into that in
Yes.
our various discussions.
For sure.
So, Tim and Linda, your disciplines are where we would more expect Utopia to be taught. So from your perspective, what are some of the main points of connections between our culture and Moore's Utopia that you are hoping students will really find relevant and interesting?
Well, I'm in the religious studies department, but I also am the program director for the ethics minor. So ethics and religion are two very, very strong themes in Utopia. It's interesting because, and ironic, because in Utopia, Moore really emphasizes religious tolerance. He talks about the fact that everybody in Utopia is free to practice their faith in any way they want, except for atheists. They really get a hard time in Utopia. But what was so ironic about it is that in his real life, Thomas More was a radical and pretty tough persecutor of Protestants, many burning at the stake, and so he was, unfortunately, rather intolerant. So I like to kind of, it's an irony that I like to talk about with my students in this case. In terms of ethics, there are all kinds of ethical questions that this text brings forward, and I'll just throw one out. This whole issue of personal privacy. There really is no personal privacy in Utopia. Everything is, you are constantly being observed, and what that does to people. And in our age, when our privacy is constantly being compromised, I think that this book raises questions that we need to think about seriously.
I noticed that from my memory of reading it, no one's doors even have locks on
That's right.
them. So
That's
it's
right.
that open of a society. Anyone can go into anyone's house.
That's right.
And you also can't get attached to your property. There is no personal property, so you have to move. I think it's every 6 or 7 years
Yeah.
to a new place. One of the things when I have the students read those sections, I ask them, would you want to live in such a society? And it's, getting back to about economics, what it's probably best known for is it's a defense of communism.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to read it backwards, knowing about Karl Marx and later movement, when of course what Moore was referring to in large part were the early Christians, saying that they
Yes.
owned everything in common, and why did that break down? So what always has fascinated me first of all, it's a very funny book. It has a lot of puns, a lot of jokes. The fact, for example, Thomas More, who was a lawyer, says that in a perfect society there are no lawyers. Which, you know, he's
That's
poking
funny.
fun at himself. But also the word itself, it has come to mean the perfect society, but the literal meaning is no place. And so in a sense, he's telling us there is no perfect world. We're not going to ever create a perfect society. In my reading, at least, is he's saying we've got to do the best we can. We got to muddle along and not keep looking for perfection. And so what makes it still a text for our common era, as well as, you know, relevant in its past, is this constant attempt, you know, to make a perfect world, is say, well, I'm not happy unless everything is just so. Saying, well, it's not the way it's going to be. You know, we have to do the best we can.
Yeah, and another, going back to economics, this whole idea of the book is a really interesting critique of materialism. And again, with no private property, this whole idea of trying to acquire lots and lots of stuff is really pointless. And in fact, they have a very interesting take on gold and silver, that they use gold and silver in ways in which we wouldn't dream of using gold and silver. I'm not going to give it away. Let people who want to come to the various events find out about gold and silver. But it's quite interesting. You want to comment on that?
That's why we didn't wear any bling.
We're really no bling. Yeah, really. Do you want to say anything about
The
that,
use of gold and
Claire?
silver?
Or
Yeah.
just materialism?
So it's the communal property and the private property aspect of it is very, very interesting, because in economics we think a lot about incentives, and so
Yeah, that's
I find myself aligning sometimes with Moore, the character, right, in the book, who questions whether society can be as productive, because in Utopia everybody works, everybody is productive, they only have to work 6 hours a day. But they have more than enough, material. I think they say necessities and moderate luxuries for everyone. And sometimes it's hard to imagine how that works, how you motivate people. I guess there's this fear of punishment if you aren't effectively productive. But it's an interesting question, right?
Yeah, and I think that this is where we get into the ethics too, because getting into incentives and motivations, Moore was very idealistic, and he really believed that you should be working for the common good versus completely working for self-interest. And he kind of extols this ideal both explicitly and implicitly in some of the ways in which he organizes the family and organizes the society. But you should be working for the good of all. So it is a very communistic sort of collective idea.
The other fascinating point, the historical context, it was written in 1516, shortly after the discovery of the Americas. And so there was a lot of wealth that was coming into Europe, and Moore was quite aware of this and the fact that it was having a corrupting influence. Suddenly the economies of Spain and Portugal and England were booming, but the common people didn't seem to be benefiting much from this. And the lead character somebody creates named Hythloday is actually an explorer who says he's traveled with Amerigo Vespucci. So you learn in reading the book about the discovery of the Americas. Of course, America was named for Vespucci, or Amerigo. And also the fact that Moore was saying, a lot of these reports about the Americas are not very reliable. I think people are just making stuff up. And so he did himself, in a sense, saying, I'm going to make up a perfect society and set it somewhere in the new land.
So I know we don't want to have too many spoilers, but so just as a brief yes or no, is it dealt with? Are women's issues dealt with?
Oh, yes.
Is slavery dealt with?
Oh, yes.
Is military enterprise
Oh, yes.
dealt with?
War is dealt with, yes.
So
very
he
much.
really takes on big issues
Everything.
of his time.
Yes.
And euthanasia is dealt
Yes,
with.
euthanasia. So there's so many topics, again, that makes this book very relevant to us. And it's 2 books in the book itself, and book 1 really takes on the political argument that looks at Hythloday as this, it's a Platonic, not to get too philosophical, but
Stepping on
sorry,
my turf here.
but this whole idea of being a great counselor to kings and whether or not they'd actually listen to you. And of course he was not listened to, and he doesn't even want to be a counselor, but he uses that as kind of the jumping off place to say, if I were to be a counselor and if I were to tell you, you're not going to listen to me, but I'm going to tell you about this great place, Utopia, and what life was like there.
And of course, Hythloday means speaker of nonsense.
That's great.
It's kind of letting us know you better be
Right.
careful. You
So
think what this guy's telling you is
A
true.
speaker of nonsense is talking about no
Nothing.
place.
That's right. That's right.
Well, shall we talk about the events specifically, and then maybe we can. Do you want to run down what some of them?
Can I say one thing
Yes,
about
please.
Hythloday? I think it's interesting in the book that Hythloday, the character, and Moore, the character, have such a good, healthy civil exchange, right? Because Hythloday is presenting this alternative, right? This utopia. Moore is fascinated by it, likes some parts of it, but does not just hop on board with everything. And they have some really good discussions, which I think is instructive for what we can do through Fisher Reads in general. And what I think is fun about all of us, each of us in our class, is bringing different disciplines, different worldviews, different ways of looking at it to the same text. And I think it's been really fun among the faculty, right, to discuss and debate some of these things. And I think that's good for students to model how you can have civil, respectful debate about these issues that were interesting to Thomas More 500 years ago and are incredibly relevant today. I think that in the liberal arts tradition, that sort of dialogue and that discussion is really important.
Yeah, see, we're still talking,
That's
all
right.
of us. Yeah, and I think one of the other things that in that first book is really important, because actually the whole book, that the point where you have the ideal, which Hythloday really presents. But then, as you say, Thomas More is the practical. What can actually be achieved? And so there has to be that kind of healthy balance between what we strive for and what we can practically realize. And so both are needed. So I think that's one of the strengths of this book as well.
Well, the other irony, I use this book also when I teach political philosophy, because More, in a sense, is saying, we got to muddle through. The only hope for any political system is if decent people get involved and don't expect perfection. But the irony is that at the beginning he says, aren't we lucky here in England that now we have good King Henry VIII? His father was not so good, but we are very fortunate. Of course, we the readers know Henry VIII is going to have your head chopped off in 20 years.
Just a few years.
Something More
Yeah.
did not anticipate. Which, in a sense, is almost saying maybe you should stay out of politics.
So tell us what some of the main events are.
On September 30th, there's going to be a lecture by Father Bill Graff, where he does bring together Thomas More and St. John, both saints, St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher, and the name of the talk is A Tale of Two Saints. Very clever. And then on October 4th, from 3 to 5 p.m. at the Lavery Library, we're going to have a panel discussion, Utopia at 500, an interdisciplinary discussion. So we're hoping to really have, we have a different faculty from different disciplines, and we're going to, I hope, have a spirited and lively and interesting discussion about Utopia at 500.
And cake.
And cake, that's right, we have cake.
Birthday
So
cake.
another incentive,
500th
that's right.
500th birthday cake.
Thank you for yeah. And then on Tuesday, October 11th, from 11 to 12:20, there's going to be a wonderful panel discussion in Wilson Formal and student presentations. And the panel discussion is entitled, "The First Thing We Do, Let's Kill All the Lawyers." So that'll give you a sense of the spirit of the thing. Wednesday, October 19th, from 11:15 until 12:15 in the Golisano Mid-Level Gateway, there will be another panel discussion on Thomas More's Utopia, the Contemporary Relevance. And I think that our discussion has really sort of opened that window into what we're going to be talking about. It does have contemporary relevance. And then finally, the series is going to cap off on October 27th from 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. in the Basil Auditorium. We're going to be showing the fantastic film, A Man for All Seasons, a classic film. And before the film, we will have a brief panel discussion about the film and about what is going to be presented in the film. And then if people want to stay after and talk about it, we will.
And we're hoping all these will inspire people to read Utopia.
Yes.
Not just for the month of October, but as a constant presence on campus.
Great. And I'm sure it's available online since it's old.
That it is.
There are several versions that you can get online, absolutely.
And the bookstore probably has some copies of the actual book,
Yeah.
Yes,
or will by the end of September.
absolutely, for sure.
And we also have, there's a statue of Thomas More
yes,
in the
the
library.
selfies.
And we're encouraging everyone to take a selfie with
Yes.
Tommy
Selfie
during the
with
celebration of Utopia.
And do you want to mention the severed head?
Well, there is a severed head. There's a display in the library. My friend Bosco Hogan, who I interviewed here when he visited last year, he played John Fisher in the TV show The Tudors. And sadly, both Thomas More and John Fisher were beheaded under the orders of Henry VIII for going against declaring himself the head of the Church of England. And Bosco had a replica of his own head that they used in the series, was wondering what he would do with that, and he kindly donated it to the Fisher Archives. It's very tastefully done. You know, he actually, luckily, he told me he had mailed it to me ahead of time, because I thought if I opened the box, I might have had a heart attack.
Glad he warned you. Not to mention being arrested.
Actually, it's a quick story about Thomas More. More and Fisher had their heads placed above the Tower of London as a warning to traders. And More was very close to his daughter Margaret, and he made sure that she got a very good education, and that's depicted in the movie. But she actually apparently went up to the guards and asked if they would give her her father's head so that she could bury it properly. And I always thought this was one of the most moving and disturbing images, that she had a basket and they gave her her father's head to bury.
Yeah, isn't that called Trader's Gate?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So if you're ever in the Tower of London, that's a rather eerie connection to our school.
That is a horrible note to end on.
It's not a utopian note.
Let's end on a different note. What is the one thing you would hope students would come away from October? When October's over, what will be a success for the program for you?
I think that books are important, and classic texts are important, and they all have something really important to say to us and convey to us, and that we can learn from them, and we should not give up on them. They're worth it. They're wonderful.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dr. McCammon, Dr. Smith, and Dr. Madigan. I personally am really looking forward to the Fisher Reads events, and I will be there. And I want to thank you all for your work in putting together a great program. And everyone, you can find the schedule of events on the college website. Once you are there, just enter the search term Utopia, and you can find it online at #MoreUtopia. Love that name.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Deb.